Morning, everyone. This is Chelsea Schwartz with the Health Quality Council. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks for joining us this morning. So for those of you who have been following our series, welcome back. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, I just want to give you a little bit of context about the Working Remotely series. So QI Power Hour has historically been a community of learners who have come together around an interest in quality improvement, or QI. But what joins us together today is this current reality that we're facing. So you're likely finding yourself here today because you have recently shifted to working remotely. For some of you, perhaps for the first time. So welcome. We hope that the series can be of use to you in this time. We hope that we can provide you with some ideas and insights to try, but also a sense of community and perhaps some new connections as well. So we always like to start our sessions by acknowledging the land that we're meeting on today. So again, I'm joining you from my home office in Warman, which is situated on Treaty 6 territory and traditional lands of the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and is the homeland of the Métis. So it's our organizational and my personal intent to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation, the reparation of trust and relationships, to be able to truly collaborate to improve healthcare in particular, and society as a whole. So I invite you to share where you're joining us from today. And the way that you can do that is through the chat function. So for those of you new to WebEx, I'll just let you know how you can do that. So to launch the chat function, you can click on the message bubble at the bottom of your screen, which will launch the chat panel over on the right-hand side. And we'll be making some pretty heavy use of this throughout our session today. So you'll want to locate where that is. Great, I see that some people have already found it. So folks joining us from Weyburn, Regina, Moose Jaw, Saskatoon, Yorkton, fantastic. Oh, a fellow Warmanite, welcome. So we do just encourage you to send it to all participants so that everyone can see your response and join in the conversation. Perfect, welcome everyone. And so just a note that we are recording today's session. So if you find yourself in perhaps different working circumstances, perhaps you have children at home or some other dependents at home or something that does take you away from today's session, don't worry, you can access the recorded session after the fact. It will be available on our website. And so as I've reflected and shared with you over the past two sessions, I'm increasingly aware and appreciative of all of the sectors and organizations that contribute to an overall healthy and well and functional society. So I share this with you today to just let you know who has been part of our learning community on QI Power Hour in the past. Typically, or historically, I would say, we have been joined by those working in the healthcare sector. As you can probably tell from our name, the Health Quality Council has primarily worked in that sector to date. But I'm increasingly appreciative and hyper aware of all of the people needed to make a society run and function. So thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for your commitment to ongoing learning. Thank you for joining us today as we pivot to new ways of working. So one of the tools that we use along with our session is Twitter. So if you are active on Twitter, we invite you to share out some insights or reflections that you have from today's session with others who might find themselves in a working remotely situation. So you can use the handles QI Power Hour and HQC Sask and the hashtag QI Power Hour. And with that, we'll launch into our session today. So we're joined this morning by Dr. Adam Stacey. Dr. Stacey is an assistant professor at the University of Saskatchewan, where he also serves as the director of the U of S Psychology Clinic. So he has studied to date stress-related work amongst healthcare professionals. So a great addition to our session for today, and we're so grateful that you could join us today, Dr. Stacey. So I'll pass the ball over to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Chelsea, yeah? Okay, great.
You bet, yeah.
Awesome. Well, hi, welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be quote unquote here with all of you this morning. I'd just like to echo Chelsea's land acknowledgement. I'm also here at my home in Saskatoon, which is on Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. Also, just a quick thank you to Chelsea and Riley, who is running things in the background right now, from the Health Quality Council for inviting me to deliver this webinar this morning. And finally, just an extending welcome to all of you, wherever or whenever, I guess, because this is being recorded, you might be tuning in. I want to start off by sort of stating the obvious. We're gathered together this morning under some unique and challenging circumstances. The COVID-19 pandemic and social distancing have called for sudden and significant changes to the way that we work and the way that we live. And while there are many challenges associated with these new ways of being, there are also some opportunities to be safe and be well at home. And so that's what I'd like to talk about today. This morning, I'm going to discuss the foundational elements of mental health, these sort of activities of everyday living that you can engage in to improve and maintain your own well-being. And I'm also going to explore some ways that we can develop, adapt, and maintain a personal care routine. So following the webinar today, this morning, I hope all of you will be able to describe this concept of self as tool. Mostly I talk about this in the context, as Chelsea mentioned, of healthcare professionals, but I do think this self as tool concept applies to a wide variety of professions. I want you to be able to identify consequences of high stress. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to help you develop, adapt, or maintain a personal wellness routine. And then we can discuss some unique challenges and opportunities provided by this COVID-19 pandemic related to personal wellness. So, as Chelsea mentioned, I'm a provisionally registered clinical psychologist, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Saskatchewan. And so I'm coming to this topic today from the perspective of a healthcare professional myself. And from my discussions with Chelsea and Riley, I understand that many of the folks in the audience are also frontline healthcare professionals, while others operate behind the scenes, impacting policy, procedures, and supporting those frontline service professionals. Regardless of your position or your profession, I believe that most of us who get involved in healthcare do so because we're genuinely curious about other people. I know that there are folks in the room this morning who, like me, find it really enjoyable and fulfilling to connect with another person in a meaningful way. And obviously, that's been increasingly difficult to do in our current circumstances. I think one thing that's really important to remember for healthcare professionals, and I think professionals in general, is that we are in a relationship business. And every day, at least in the past, we've had the opportunity to connect with patients and clients, build relationships with them, and then use those relationships to impact change, to help and to heal. So that's how things really work for me as a helper. I'm curious, and so that leads me to want to connect. And when I connect, I care. And when I care, I want to help. So curiosity, connection, caring, and helping. Unfortunately for people in the healthcare industry, there's no pill or password or magic wand that will allow you to develop a relationship with a patient. At the end of the day, you are the tool. And so that's very apparent in my work as a clinical psychologist. And so for healthcare professionals, there's this bidirectional relationship between the personal and the professional. Okay, so things that you experience at work have an impact on your personal life, and your personal life, or what you do in your own time, is going to impact your ability to perform professionally. I mean, this seems straightforward, but it does have some ramifications to it. one analogy I like to use is that you'd never use a dull scalpel or a dirty needle or a recalled medication to care for a patient. And like any tool, it's important that you too stay sharp. And it's important to recognize that if we want to care for our patients, we really do have to care for and about ourselves. Again, I think this really applies to a lot of different work environments. I know many of you are joining us from other professions this morning, so welcome. And I hope there's some takeaways for you here as well. One thing that I find interesting is that some professional bodies, like the Canadian Psychological Association, actually mandate this kind of self-care behavior from their members. So the ethical code for the CPA, which guides my practice, that's what I follow, states the following. Psychologists must engage in self-care activities that help to avoid conditions like burnout and addictions that could result in an impaired judgment and interfere with their ability to benefit and not harm others. Okay, so I think that the line in the sand here is really not, am I doing harm to someone else? Am I doing harm to a patient or a client? But rather the line in the sand is, am I doing something or not doing something that is making me unable to benefit this other person to my full capacity? So my goal this morning is to help you maybe recognize some of these occupational hazards of being healthcare professionals in general. We're going to discuss some simple and straightforward strategies that can help to find and maintain this personal wellness, sometimes elusive. And unsurprisingly, our basic needs in terms of wellness and health haven't really changed, despite all of these things that have changed in our life, all of these shifts that we've had to make during COVID-19. Those things really haven't changed what our sort of foundational needs. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. I'm going to use sort of two screens here for my slides, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so me, there I am as a younger person. I really do believe that occupations, especially ones with really high stress levels, like being a psychologist or a physician or frontline healthcare professional, can really encourage us to lose sight of ourselves, to depersonalize, if you will. And so when I meet patients for the first time, I ask them all the same thing. I ask them, would you please tell me about yourself? And many people find this, extremely open-ended question to be rather uncomfortable or confusing. I'm interested in what patients tell me and also, more importantly, what they tell me first. And their responses often follow the same pattern. Well, I'm a student, I'm a physician, I'm a plumber, I am, my occupation. And I think that line of thinking is worth reflecting on and maybe turning on its head a bit. I would encourage all of you to ask yourselves this morning if you can accurately represent yourself with a single word, that of your occupation. In other words, is your occupation the most important part of you? And so my first lesson this morning is to remember that you are not your job. And I firmly believe that this paradigm shift is an important step towards balance. Your job is something that you do, something that's important, something that takes up a lot of our time, but it's not us. And so further, besides your occupation, what are some of the things that make you you? What do you value? What are your personal and professional needs? I think one of the opportunities that COVID has presented us with is more time for reflecting on some of these things. What is fundamentally important to me? What do I really need? And so, it's a nice opportunity, maybe a kick in the pants moment for us to do some of this really important reflecting. And so in that spirit of reflecting on what's important to us, I want to share a little of myself with you this morning, so that you can get to know me a little bit and so that I don't become this depersonalized one-line person of the bio. So I grew up in a small town in Nova Scotia called Stellarton, which is the home of Sobeys. I'm sure many of you know Sobeys. Not a whole lot going on. Actually, I know my mom's on the call this morning, so shout out to my mom who's joining us from Stellarton. But I've always been involved in my community through volunteering, nonprofit work. I really love coffee and scotch in moderation and sometimes together. Making, serving, and eating good food and drinks makes me forget that Donald Trump is the president, and that makes me very, very happy. I think there may be somebody joining us from the U.S. today, so welcome to you. My partner is also my partner is also from the U.S., so sort of watching what's going on in the States with shock and horror, I guess, and hopeful that things will improve. I completed my Bachelor of Arts in Applied Psychology with honors at Acadia University, which is right in the middle of Nova Scotia wine country. And after I graduated from Acadia, I started grad school at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. I also lived in Fredericton, New Brunswick off and on, and during my residency, that's where I was. And then I moved to Saskatoon in 2017 to start the job that I'm currently in. So I'm slowly getting used to life on the prairies. And so again, it's really nice to be here with all of you today. On this slide is my family, my mom, my sister Jenna, and my mom's partner Jimmy. They're actually at Acadia attending my sister's graduation. So a few more things about me. I used to be a pretty good tall ship sailor, but I'm a little washed up now. One of the things that the prairies is not conducive with is open ocean sailing. But the summer I graduated high school, I sailed across the Atlantic Ocean from Halifax to Belfast in Northern Ireland. And I've also sailed throughout all the Great Lakes and every province in Atlantic Canada. And I think that actually being a sailor has left me really well prepared for pandemic life. I have lots of experience living and working in places that I actually can't leave. And so there are other things about sailing that I think are really relevant here, working towards a common goal. And that's something, although we're all separate today in our own respective homes, we really are working towards a common goal. And not to be too dramatic, but oftentimes that goal in sailing is to really keep each other alive, to keep the ship safe. And that's what we're trying to do as a team now, all in our respective home offices or wherever you happen to be joining us from today. Also, provisioning the ship, keeping people on the ship healthy, finding ways to stay active in confined spaces, eating well when you might not be able to pop out to a grocery store all the time. So all of these things about ship life, I actually think have become really relevant for me in the past couple of weeks. So yeah, something to reflect on a little bit more. Also here in the middle on the top are some of my friends and I on PEI enjoying some ice cream, probably to cheer us up after a horrible round of golf. The second picture in the middle is my partner Zach. As I mentioned, he is American, and that picture was taken in beautiful New Hampshire, back when we could travel places. And Zach's also working from home, so he's just downstairs with our dog. And also on this slide are some people that I went to school with at Memorial, psychologists working hard to support some of those frontline healthcare workers around the country. And the last one, my sister, when she graduated from Acadia, also with a psychology degree. Okay, so a couple other quick ones. I really like being outside. I like traveling. I like being out and eating with my friends, and all of those things are obviously things that we can't do right now. So finding some of these things might be difficult. One of the things I value really is community, and it's hard to build and maintain that community when we're all socially distant. I'm also on the board of directors at Out Saskatoon, so that's an LGBTQ2S outreach center, community support center here in Saskatoon. It's a great organization, and so I really like spending time there. So that's really me in a nutshell. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that there's a lot more to me than the fact that I'm a healthcare professional. In fact, it's a rather small part of who I am. And I, again, encourage all of you to think about what is important to you outside of your work. I'm really a big believer in working to live, not living to work. And so asking yourself, what is it that you are working for? So maybe that's things that are important to you, things that are important to your family, but something to reflect on. Okay, so for the past 6 or 7 years now, I've been fixated really on occupational stress, wellness, and interventions for individuals in high-stress jobs. Mostly I work with frontline healthcare professionals, like nurses and physicians, but I'm also interested in how and when the healthcare education environment facilitates or stifles wellness. I'm currently collecting data to investigate how levels of stress and burnout change over the course of medical school. However, I'm not going to address any of my research directly today. I'm also not going to be quoting any systematic reviews or randomized control trials this morning. If you picture this hierarchy of evidence, I'm really shooting for the lower parts of the pyramid. So that is my own allegedly expert opinion and my anecdotal clinical experiences. Obviously, a lot of those are derived from my evidence-based stance to therapy and to wellness in general. If you want to talk more about research, then feel free to reach out to me through email after our talk today. So this is an overview of some of the main points that I'd like to cover this morning. First, I want to discuss stress and what can happen when we don't take care of ourselves. So what are some of these warning signs to look out for? Obviously, I also want to talk about self-care, what self-care is, why we should practice it, and how we can do that. Additionally, I'm going to discuss some challenges and opportunities that we're facing given these new ways of being. And then finally, I'm going to offer some places to start, some sort of tips and tricks that I've learned the hard way. And there's going to be time for questions at the end as well. Great. Okay, so moving on. All right, so I want to spend some time talking about stress, something that we're all really familiar with, and also distress. And so two things really are important for our discussion here. The first is to realize that stress is relative. Okay, so this means that one person's breaking point feel quite manageable to another person. So it's important that we are attentive to ourselves, that we develop this self-awareness to know, what does make us stressed, and equally so, what helps to alleviate that stress. And that's going to allow us to be much more effective in taking care of ourselves, and also for the healthcare professionals in the room for taking care of others. I was telling Chelsea and Riley before we started today that my funding for my I'm off my notes now. My funding for grad school, for my research project in grad school, really came from a health quality improvement initiative, because physicians, for example, who are very stressed, have a tendency to not make the greatest decisions. Sometimes they make mistakes. And so it's important that we do take care of ourselves. Again, going back to this concept of you really are one of those important tools for your job. So you need to stay sharp and well, and that's going to impact your ability to perform. Discovering this thermometer, if you will, for yourself is a process, but I encourage all of you to begin or continue that exploration of self-awareness. This journey is a personal one, but that doesn't mean that it has to be traveled alone. So you can use your family, your friends, coworkers as a barometer if you struggle to recognize when you're under stress. You can trust me, they know, and they'll gladly tell you if you ask them. Journaling is another really excellent way to reflect on your experiences and develop more self-awareness. Given that many of us also have extra time on our hands right now while working from home, I would suggest using that time in an impactful manner to reflect and enhance your self-awareness. So really here, I'm trying to get a sense of what does a 10 look like for me? What does a 5 look like for me? How do I know that I'm at a 5 on this stress thermometer? The second thing that's important to remember is that stress is cumulative. So many people incorrectly believe that stress can be compartmentalized into convenient boxes. So for example, I'm going to pack up all my work-related stress and I'm going to leave it on this desk. And when I leave my office and go into the rest of my life outside of this room, all that stress is just going to stay right exactly where I put it. When I come in again on Monday, open up my office door, it's going to be right there waiting for me. And my box of home stress is just right outside this door. But unfortunately, that would be great if we could do that. But unfortunately, that's really not the case. That's not how stress works. All of this really gets tied up together. And so a nicer way to think about this, rather than separate boxes that you can open and close at any given time, is more of a backpack. So anything that's stressing you out is going to go in that backpack. And unfortunately, we have to carry that around with us all the time. And so everything that you experience is going to impact that backpack. And forms of stress really don't differentiate. So stress doesn't care if this came from your work, came from your relationship, or came from your car breaking down. It really doesn't matter. All of that's going to impact your stress. So knowing that stress is, number one, relative, different for you than others, and that two, cumulative, it builds onto itself, it's most helpful, I think, to think about stress and distress in terms of this thermometer. So again, everyone's thermometer is unique, and that's the relative part. So if you want to imagine yourself walking around with this thermometer in your mouth all day long, everything you experience is impacting your temperature. Everything is going into that backpack. And unfortunately, for a lot of us who work in healthcare, we have stressful experiences often, and this can cause our temperature to rise. So for example, a little example, and so I've used an example from our previous life where we were attending work, or not necessarily attending work from our home office. So if this morning one of your patients takes a turn for the worst, there's 2 degrees. In the afternoons, maybe your colleague is unsupportive or invalidating, another 2 degrees. At 3 o'clock, you're working with a patient who discloses that they've been assaulted, another 3 degrees. And so now you're up to 7 degrees and you're in the orange zone. These situations are stressful, and at the same time, they're difficult to avoid. Stress is part of working in healthcare. And although we cannot control these situations, we can do our best to prepare ourselves for them. So we must also recognize that regardless of what industry that you work in, if you are like me and lucky enough to actually still be working from home, I feel very grateful for the ability to still do that. But we're all under abnormally high stress levels at this time. Okay? So remember that this work-life relationship does go both ways. If things are very stressful for you at work, then they're going to carry that stress with you into your life, and vice versa. And so I think that's important to remember in terms of what are your expectations if you are working from home. What are your expectations? And I have a lot of experience working from home. Normally I work out of this office 1 or 2 days out of the week. And I can tell you from firsthand account that this is not the same. The past month has not felt the same as those days where I was working from home before. I used to love being in this office because, my partner would be gone to work. It would be me and my dog. I could get coffee whenever I wanted. And I was uber productive on those days that I was home. No students or colleagues were knocking on my door. There weren't any fires here to be put out. No clients or patients to see. And so I got a lot of work done in those days. But this is not the same thing. this is really different. And I'm under increased stress now, and as are you. And so it's unfair that I would have these same expectations of myself and my productivity while I'm working from home now. I've seen this tweet circulating a lot recently, which is you're not working from home, you're at home during a pandemic trying to work. And so I think there's a lot of truth to that. This is really where self-care can come into play. So the reason that we engage in self-care is twofold. First, it's about alleviating levels of high stress. So in other words, we're going to engage in self-care to bring our temperature down when it's very high. And second, we can use self-care to work on keeping our baseline temperature or our baseline stress levels as low as possible so that you can do the things that are important for you. So maybe you live by an ocean and you can sail. Maybe you are taking care of a loved one. Maybe you are taking care of patients at work. But if you can keep those baseline levels low, that's going to enable you to be well and more effective in some of those other important things that you're doing. So one of the things I'd like to do is to just ask a question of all of you today, and you can use the chat. I want to know how you know that you're stressed. So if we think about this relative part of our thermometer, what are the things that happen to you when you're not managing your stress levels, when things get up in this orange or red zone? What are some of those indicators? Not really sure. Okay, so eating, poor sleep, tightness in your jaw, irritable, avoidant, defensive, depressed. Sleep, again, we're going to talk more about sleep. I find this very, very frequently. Yeah, you're less patient, feeling overwhelmed more easily. What else? Feeling rage, feeling like you have this short fuse or short-tempered, that's very common. Migraines or headaches. Yeah, eating more or conversely eating less, also very common. Problems with chronic health conditions. So maybe something that's been bothering you before is acting up or being exacerbated. Feeling very tired, sleeping again coming up. Great. Yeah, feeling maybe a lot of these more stereotypically negative emotions in a more intense way. Thanks, everyone. So I think, again, really what I'm encouraging you to do here is to look for these markers for yourself. And they're going to be different for me than they are for you. So remember that this is a thermometer unique to you. But I would encourage you to consider, what are those things? How do I know when I'm at a 5? How do I know when I'm at a 10? And that's going to be really helpful, because without that awareness, without that insight, it's going to be more difficult to be impactful in lowering that level down, right? So we really need an accurate way to measure this, and that's something that I can't do for you, something that I would encourage you to do yourselves or with the help of friends and family. So unsurprisingly, I mean, a lot of us have personal experience with feeling distressed, and I think the difference between distress and stress is really this. Stress is the response to a demand, and distress is maybe when we feel overwhelmed by that demand. So something inside of us or externally is saying, you're not going to be able to meet this demand, and that's going to generate feelings of distress. A lot of you mentioned really, really similar things here. This is just from the CDC website. I'm going to be talking about later some nice little resources, but there's a lot of folks, including the CPA, Canadian Psychological Association, the APA, and the US, putting out some really great stuff to help folks. So, some quick Google searches and you can get some really great information. This just is from the CDC website around what are some signs of distress. And many of you mentioned these things already. So feelings of numbness, anxiety, fear. Many people mentioned anxiety, and I think that's a totally normal response to a very abnormal situation, right? So sometimes we get caught up, I'm feeling very worried and I shouldn't be feeling this way. Well, now is a pretty good time to feel worried about things. I think a lot of the anxiety that we might be having right now is very justified and valid way to feel at this point. Also, many of you mentioned changes in appetite, so eating more or less, in your activity levels, difficulty concentrating. And so you can really see how a lot of these things are going to impact our ability to do those other things that are valuable for us, to engage in our work in an effective manner. Difficulty sleeping, big one, and we're going to talk specifically about sleep. I don't think enough people talk about sleep, and we spend so much time doing it, at least ideally we do. I'm going to go into some sleep tips actually specifically later on this morning. Physical reactions, also common. So a lot of people talking about, tension in their shoulders or back. These things are very common as well when we're feeling high levels of distress or stress. Worsening of chronic health. A lot of people contributed in the chat this sort of short fuse idea. So being irritable, feeling like little things, so mountains out of molehills. And then also what I've been seeing a lot is increased use of alcohol, tobacco, or other drugs. So people finding ways to cope with their stress in maybe ways that are effective, but not necessarily going to be adaptive over the long term, or not really good sustainable strategies to manage our health and wellness. Okay, so what are some more of these consequences over the long term? So in terms of healthcare professionals, there's this great quote from Freud, and he says, "No one who, like me, conjures the most evil of those half-tamed demons that inhabit the human breast and seeks to wrestle with them can expect to come through the struggle unscathed." Now, admittedly, Freud said a lot of things, but some of them were actually right. And I think it's important that we're honest with each other here. Being in healthcare is difficult. Burnout is common. Suicide rates are through the roof, double the general population. Substance abuse rates are higher. Life satisfaction levels tend to be lower. Patients don't come to therapy or to the hospital because everything in their lives is wonderful. They come with their own problems, with illnesses, with trauma, with their own stress. And as healthcare professionals, we really have to swim in all of this all day. In other words, we work in an environment that is conducive with chronic levels of high stress. And to use a bit of a loaded word here, that stress can be contagious. It rubs off on us. And as Freud said, it's foolish to think that we can do all of this very hard work, swim through all of this stress, some of it our own, most of it our patients, and then expect to come out squeaky clean on the other side. And so when individuals experience these chronic levels of high stress, when they're not bringing their thermometer down effectively, there are going to be consequences. And burnout, I think, is one of the most common of those consequences of this chronic high stress or chronic distressed state. And so burnout is characterized by exhaustion, depersonalization, like we talked about at the start, and this reduced sense of accomplishment or professional efficacy. And burnout can leave us feeling all sorts of different ways, mostly negative, sad, angry, irritable. It's also related to insomnia, to substance abuse, heart disease, and an increased vulnerability to illness. The Mayo Clinic has a nice little summary of burnout on their website, and they list a bunch of identified risk factors. Okay, there are actually 6 of them, 6 risk factors for developing burnout. And one of them is being a healthcare professional. So I think that really goes to show that burnout is so common in our industry that some of the leading minds in the burnout field, some of whom I've worked with quite closely, exclusively work with healthcare professionals, right? And so for me, when I study professional wellness and I study workplace stress and occupational hazards, I want to work with a population that actually has a lot of those. And so that's definitely healthcare professionals. And so many people, that's their whole bread and butter, burnout in healthcare, and there's a lot of it. What else? So our mental health levels, concerns about chronic stress. We know that there's lots of good evidence around chronic levels of distress or high stress, encouraging depression and anxiety, and also dulling cognitive functioning. So many of you talked about in the chat, not being able to concentrate, not being able to make good decisions. And that's very, very common. I think ultimately what's important to remember is that our patients or our loved ones or our students, whoever those people who are sort of stakeholders of our performance, they don't deserve the cognitively dull version of us. They don't deserve low quality care. They don't deserve sort of half-assed instruction, right? They deserve the best of us, and we deserve the best of us as well. Relationships also tend to suffer, and people isolate themselves from support networks. And I think that's another thing that you're seeing with COVID and our pandemic response and social distancing is that a lot of people are increasingly isolated, especially older folks. And so we need to think about that and take some steps, which we're going to talk about later, to combat some of that isolation. So really what I'm saying here is that social distancing can facilitate this environment in which social isolation can thrive. However, just because we're apart physically doesn't mean that there's not a way to be connected socially. So we've been seeing many creative ways of combating this relationship between being socially distant and being socially isolated. And as I believe I mentioned earlier this morning, I'm a bit of an amateur bartender. I really like making cocktails and learning about the science and history behind good food and good drinks. And so this evening, I'm actually hosting another webinar for my friends, where I'm going to be teaching them how to make some gin cocktails. So there'll be probably 30 of them from all across the country, some from the US. And so we're all going to get together and make some drinks tonight. And I get to do what I love, which is talking, as you can tell, and teaching other people. So lots of ways, really thanks to technology, that we can stay connected despite being apart. So I'm wondering if we can again use this chat, if you've noticed any creative ways that you or maybe people that you know have been using to stay connected during social distancing. So what are some things that you've heard about, creative ways to encourage this connection while being apart? FaceTime, yes, singing over video chat. That's really cool. Playing games together online, also a great idea. Zoom dinners, that's great. That's a great idea. What else do we have here? Snail mail. I have a typewriter actually, so sometimes I'll type out letters to my friends, which is kind of fun. I never seem to get any mail in return, but that's all right. Drive-by visits with grandma out of her balcony. Okay, so that's a nice idea. Driving in your car, calling out of the window, honking horns, dropping gifts off, all great ideas. Yeah, one of my friends is an excellent baker, and so she also has a lot of time on her hands. So Zach and I have been really pleased that sometimes we get this knock on our door and then there's like a pie on our step or something, which is so wonderful. Smudging, thanks Jess. Virtually going to museums. Yeah, so there's a lot of organizations offering like virtual tours. Awesome. Great, yeah, notes, virtual dance classes. Thanks everybody. I appreciate it. So, I'm also a little bit saddened that my mind first goes to making cocktails and everyone else seems to have much more adaptive ideas. Listening to more podcasts, going to the gym online. Yeah, you can also, I've seen a lot of people sort of co-working, so just being on Zoom or some other platform to just have somebody else there to kind of keep you accountable for your work, have someone else there to chat with. So all really great ideas, thank you. Ultimately here, we need to remember that this distress level is going to impact our functioning, okay? And I oftentimes with healthcare professionals, because some of us have this sort of savior complex, the hook for me is your patients, do it for your patients, be well for your patients. And if that's what you need to justify your wellness or justify your personal care routine, then absolutely go for that. do it. And there's good research to support this idea that you're going to provide better care if you're taking better care of yourself. However, ultimately just feel better for you to stay well and to keep your stress levels low. So if you have to do it for your patients, then absolutely you should. But also I would encourage you to just do it for yourselves as well. Okay, so moving on. What do we do? What is self-care? So self-care is really easy in terms of its definition, maybe not in terms of its practice. But self-care is the practice of taking action to preserve or improve your own health. Okay, so essentially, it's you caring for yourself. Fairly self-explanatory. And really the goal here is to control what can be controlled. So that is to do what can be done to keep your baseline level of stress as low as possible, and then to return to that baseline level quickly following times when your thermometer goes through the roof. All right? So our current situation may be leading some of you to feel as though things are out of control. And admittedly, many of the stressors that we are currently experiencing are largely out of our control. However, that does not mean that we as individuals are not in control of important elements of our experience. So Viktor Frankl, if anyone knows Dr. Frankl, is one of the most influential voices in existential psychotherapy, the Holocaust survivor who found himself a prisoner at Auschwitz and other concentration camps. Frankl once said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Hey, I like to think that Dr. Frankl would be searching for opportunities in our current situation to choose, to grow, to be free, despite these restrictions that we're currently abiding by. Dr. Frankl also said, when we are no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Okay, so yeah, I'm seeing people in the chat. Caroline, is a great book. His book, Man's Search for Meaning, it's a relevant read, I think, for today. It's a quick read. And so if you're looking for something to help you deal with these ideas of freedom, of choice, of meaning and value, then I think Frankl's a really good place to go. But again, you know, when we're no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in our current circumstances to recognize that, yes, we are living through an uncertain and stressful and challenging period. And at the same time, acknowledge that we retain our power of choice, our agency, our ability to grow. And so, you know, maybe this like kick in the ass type of moment where now we have this time, we have this opportunity in front of us, and let's use it to the best of its possibilities. I don't want to be sort of sickeningly looking for a silver lining here, but I think there are many silver linings in our current situation, many takeaways that we can use to help ourselves grow. So if we think back to this thermometer example and our day that ended in the orange zone, let's imagine that you're under a lot of stress at home and that you're not taking care of yourself. So when you walk into your home office or your place of employment that morning, your temperature is already at a 4. And then you're going to have that 7-degree day that I talked about earlier. And now you're in big trouble. Because if you experience this pattern day after day in a chronic manner, that's a recipe for burnout. However, if you spend some time engaging in self-care to deal with that home stress, for example, things at work might be better as well. It doesn't take a lot. Imagine if you might spend a few moments before work being mindful. Maybe you get up a bit earlier and have breakfast, which I am horrible at doing. These behaviors might help to lower your stress levels so that when you arrive at work, when you begin work, maybe you're at a 2 degree, which is not that far away from the 4 that you were at before. Unfortunately, if you work in healthcare, you're still going to have that 7-degree day, right? You can't tell your patients, well, I'm sorry, but I actually don't want to hear this because it's stressing me out, or I really can't do anything about it because things at home are, we don't have the opportunity to do that for our patients, nor should we. So by arriving at 2 degrees instead of 4 degrees, this means that we're not going to reach our boiling point that day. We're not going to get to 10. Okay, and if we don't get to 10, it's going to be a lot easier to bring us back down. So we want to avoid that really high end of the scale. Hopefully this is making sense. Again, what we're trying to do here is keep that baseline level low and then get the levels back down once they're up in these high areas. So what can we do? How can we make self-care effective? The first thing we can do is that we need to make it personal. So things that are well suited to one individual are not necessarily a good fit for another. And you have to be involved in reflecting on, is this working? Is it helpful for me? Intention. Intention is important. Without linking an activity to an intention to improve or preserve our health, we risk our activities losing meaning and value. So for example, I work with a lot of students, and when I ask them if they're exercising, they say, no, not at all. And so obviously I, inquire a little bit more, and then they might say something like, well, I walk to school, and that takes 20 minutes, or I walk across campus twice a day for class. So they're out there, they're walking, they're moving, and maybe that's because they don't have a car. Maybe that's because they can't afford to take the bus or can't afford to park. Maybe they're exercising for all those other reasons, but they're not attaching any meaning or value to the exercise. They're doing it because they have to do it. And so you'd be amazed how effective it is to just reframe some of those seemingly unimportant activities, things that we're doing because we have to, like walking the dog, for example. If we say, yes, I'm walking to school because I don't have a car, but it's also good for my physical and mental health, flipping that switch makes that activity much more powerful, much more meaningful, okay? Because now we have this intention attached to it, okay? So you might be doing lots of things to maintain your wellness, but you're not being intentional about it. So just maybe go back and see if you can attach some of those intentional statements to what you're already doing. Self-care should be preventative and protective. So if you engage in it frequently, it can help protect you from these high stress levels and leads to a lower perception of stress and decreases the potential of long-term and chronic problems. I think one thing is to accept difficulty. Many people think of self-care as indulgence. I'm going to go and have a bath, or, baths can be self-care for sure, but I'm going to pop that bottle of champagne I've been saving, and that's my self-care. But I don't think indulgence and self-care are the same thing. And self-care, in fact, doesn't always feel good. For example, pre-COVID, I have a bad back and I sit a lot at work. And so I would get massages, usually about once a month or once every 6 weeks. And I'd be lying to you if I said that it felt good. I'd be lying to you if I said I was looking forward to going to the massage, because my massage therapist just beats the hell out of my back for an hour and then I'm sore. So I don't look forward to that activity. It's hard for me to lay there and not cry. But it's the next day, my back feels a lot better. The day after, even better than that. And it makes all the sitting that I have to do for work a little bit easier. It makes my back hurt less. So it might not feel good in the moment. It might not feel good to go for that run or to exercise or to have the motivation to sit down and meditate. That's maybe not going to be easy. It might be difficult. But when it's over, I'm glad that I did it. So when it's done, it's netting me some reward. It's netting me these positive benefits, and that's the important piece. Okay, and that really translates right into our next point here, which is effectiveness. We have to monitor how effective these things are. And if you are running, for example, for your wellness, but you really hate running and you can't even get your shoes tied up to go, well, then maybe that's not the most effective thing for you to do. Maybe you can explore some other ways of staying active that maybe are a little bit less difficult. Really, this point ties back into that self-awareness and self-monitoring. So I keep a little wellness journal by my bed, and I will just write a quick little thing every day, something I'm grateful for. I write, I exercised today. I write, I cooked myself a nice meal this evening. More than likely Zach did, but I get to write it anyway. Had a nice dinner. Things that I'm doing to take care of myself so that I can monitor that in a really tangible way. Next thing here is that balance is the goal, and I think of balance as an aspirational goal. Okay, it might not be ever the case that you attain a balanced state, but that does not diminish the value of striving for that balance. Okay, ethics. Many of us are ethically bound to do these things. And then really the next point I want to make is just living the lifestyle. And so here I'm talking about 5 things. I talk to every single one of my patients about these 5 things: sleep, exercise, nutrition, being socially connected, and sunlight or getting outside. So 5 things. If I'm feeling kind of low and crappy, I will check in. I'll go to my wellness journal. I'll think, how are these 5 things going? Oh, I've been sleeping really poorly for the past week. And I know that I need to take action in those areas. Okay, so these are things that you should really be doing every day, these 5 things. Okay, I'm just conscious of my time, and so I'm going to kind of move fairly quickly through these next things. What do we got next? Okay, so COVID. What are some challenges here? Obviously, we're in a situation, like I said earlier, where the environment's much more conducive to being isolated, feelings of frustration and boredom. We have a lot of financial stress on many people. I'm very grateful and appreciative that I'm able to still have my job and work from my home. There's health challenges, obviously. Many people that we know are ill or dying. And there's a lot of change. There's also some opportunities here to reframe this trapped in the house to actually I'm safe in the house. So, back to my example of the ship. This is my ship. I got to keep it clean, got to keep people on it healthy. This is what I have. This is my team, and I'm safe here. Also, some gratitude and appreciation. If any of you are interested in journaling, I really highly suggest that you do some gratitude journaling. What are some things that you're grateful for? There's also this opportunity of doing a fresh start for a lot of your wellness activities, for reflection. And I think change is a double-edged sword, right? It can be scary, but it can also be very helpful. Okay, so some tips and tricks. Straightforward ways to put all this really into practice. The first thing is to build your foundation. So those 5 things that we talked about: sleep, exercise, nutrition, social life, and sunlight. Next, I think for me is breathing, mindfulness, super important. Scheduling your self-care, making this commitment to yourself, being intentional about these activities. Sometimes scheduling, for example, I schedule time to exercise, I schedule time to meditate, I schedule time to cook a nice meal. All of these things are important because they're valuable. So a lot of people just put work-related meetings in their schedule, or they put tasks that they have to do. Well, this is also a way of attaching value and intention to some of these self-care activities. Put that into your schedule. And also mind the gap. So if you're self-aware, you're self-reflective, you can go back and think, where am I dropping the ball? Especially if things are not going so well. Okay, next thing is, I'm sorry about time again. I thought I was going to be like half an hour, and here I am almost an hour in. I know that we're scheduled for an hour today, so if some of you have to drop off, just remember that this will be recorded. But I'm only going to be a few more minutes here, and then we'll have time for some questions. Sleep. So I'm going to be really quick through these important sleep tips, and really these come from the National Sleep Foundation. If you have trouble with your sleep, that's going to bleed out and impact a lot of other areas of your life. Sleep is uber important for our wellness and our mental health. And these are some ways to make sure that we're sleeping well and getting a good restful sleep as well. So quantity doesn't always equal quality. First thing is be consistent. consistent time you go to bed and a consistent time you wake up. Very helpful for your body to get into that rhythm. Avoiding naps. Naps tend to indicate to me that a patient has a sleep debt or that sleep is compromised in some way. So if you're feeling tired throughout the day to the point that you need to nap, it's actually more helpful to avoid that nap, to put the nap off, because naps tend to rob quantity and quality from our nighttime rest period. Avoiding alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine is also very conducive with sleep. Exercise. I wouldn't suggest exercising immediately before you're ready to go to bed. So don't go and run 5K and then expect to come home and hit the hay. However, exercise can be helpful in maintaining a good sleep schedule. Being tired at the end of the day, exercise is related to that as well. And there's this bi-directional relationship with sleep and exercise too. So moving around, getting exercise can improve your sleep, and that's going to leave you with more energy, more motivation to, again, do those activities. Light is very important. Before the invention of the light bulb, we were getting a lot less sleep. The Sleep Foundation says that we're getting around 500 hours less per year than we were before the light bulb was invented, which is kind of crazy. So when we are in environments where there's a lot of light, our body doesn't produce melatonin. And when we're in the dark or in a dim environment, our body produces melatonin, and melatonin is what makes us feel drowsy and prepares our body well for sleep. And so limiting the amount of overhead light before you go to bed, limiting screen time from your laptop or your phone, all of these things are going to help with the light level and hopefully be more conducive with a good sleep. Temperature also, our body's like a little bit colder than room temperature for sleep. So if you can moderate the temperature in your bedroom, that's important. Having a ritual is also nice. So a lot of people, maybe that's a bath or reading a book, having a cup of tea, but something that you do in a kind of ritualistic way to prepare your body for this sleep. We're really just talking about conditioning here. We're trying to condition our body and our mind that when I have my cup of chamomile tea, now, Adam's getting ready for bed. Stopping and trying again, I think is also important. So if you're the person who's laying in bed for long hours every night, it's really important to just stop, get up, maybe go have a glass of water, have a little walk around your house. Don't go and stare into a bright light. Don't eat, a spicy Thai curry. Don't go on a run. But do something to have a little break from. We don't want to form this relationship in our brain where our bedroom or our bed equals difficulty sleeping. Right? We want that relationship to be, this is where I go for sleep. This is what happens in this environment. So if you are frustrated lying awake at night, just stop, try again, reset, and that's going to be much, much easier that night and in the future as well. And then the last thing is that our bedroom environment really should be for two things, which is sleep and sex. Okay, so we don't want to be studying or working or watching TV, playing video games, any of those things in our bed, because then we're bringing this association that our bed equals concentrating on work problems, or our bed equals studying for this test. And we don't want to set up that conditioned response. Okay, so just keep your bedroom for sleep and for sex, and that will also help with your sleep schedule. Last thing I want to talk about today before we close up is mindfulness. And so for me, mindfulness is a really important part of my wellness routine. So I meditate every day. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's an hour, but I get a little bit of time in every day. And mindfulness is really one of those skills that become more impactful over time. So I think about mindfulness kind of like a muscle. And just as I wouldn't walk into a gym for the first time and expect that I'm going to be able to bench press 300 pounds, it's unreasonable for me to turn to mindfulness only in times of crisis. Okay? Another way to think about this is to imagine if you're going to teach a 16-year-old how to drive, it's probably not a good idea to take them out on the road for the first time in the middle of a blizzard. Okay? You might want to wait for a day when the roads are clear, when the sun is shining. And while it's difficult to learn these things during times of high stress, it's not impossible. Okay? Mindfulness really defined by 3 key elements: attention, bringing attention to our present experience; intention, doing that on purpose; So being directed with our attention on purpose, and then attitude, how we do it. We do it with kindness, with curiosity, and without judgment. Obviously, teaching mindfulness is well beyond the scope of what we're going to do this morning because we're really on the edge of wrapping up here. But I do have some resources on the next slide that might be helpful. One quick strategy that we can discuss is called STOP. And so STOP is an acronym. The S is to stop. The T is to take a few breaths. The O is to observe, also helps with the self-awareness piece that we've been talking about. And then P is to proceed. Okay, so I'm going to stop, take a few breaths, think about what's going on for me, what is this experience like right now, and then carry on. And this strategy really encourages us to take a moment to check in with ourselves, develop this increased self-awareness, and mindfulness is a lovely strategy. Again, if it's practiced consistently over time, it's a wonderful strategy to improve wellness and limit the impacts of high stress. A couple things for mindfulness. A really great way to learn some basic mindfulness techniques is from an app called Headspace. It's free on the App Store and Google Play. It's a great app, and it's a really neat way to learn mindfulness skills. They also have a website. Great animations. I think one of their animators used to work for Pixar. They're great animations, very well researched and thought through. The other one is Insight Timer, which you can use to help you do seated meditations. But then also the Insight Timer has a lot of great strategies to help you learn meditation as well. Okay, I'm sorry about the time. I went way over what I thought that I would. I really encourage you all to be reflective, to spend some time thinking about your own wellness over the next little while, and hopefully you picked up some strategies that would be helpful to do that. I think really healthcare culture glorifies high stress, and hopefully together we can shift that culture by leading by example. Okay, so thank you again for inviting me into your homes or your home office. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. And I think we have time for questions. I'm not sure, Chelsea.
Sure. Yeah, well, we're recording the session, so again, Adam offered that, if you have to hop off, we completely understand. If you're able to stick with us, we welcome you to stay. We just have a couple of wrap-up notes. And actually, Adam, is it okay if I flip the order and we do our wrap-up and then entertain questions at the very end?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Riley, can you just pass me the presenter ball and I'll switch my slides? So thank you so much for sharing your time with us this morning and your insights and your experience. I think that this was really timely and helpful. I think that it's a good reminder to both be validated in what we're feeling, as well as empowered to remember that we're in control to some extent of the thoughts and our thoughts and feelings, and to take control where we can. So you'll notice this theme in wrap-up that we've had over the past couple of sessions. So I know that these are complex times, these are complex situations that we're finding ourselves in, and this is a QI framing of, amidst all that complexity, what's the next step that we can take? And so I invite you to reflect on what Dr. Stacey has told us this morning, and share in the chat if you'd like one thing that you're taking away that you can commit to doing by next Tuesday. So I'll invite you to share your ideas and commitments in the chat with others. And so for those of you who have been following the series, you'll recognize this from our first series where we hosted our first randomized coffee trial. So if this is a new thing for you, I'll just give you a brief synopsis of what this is. So it's essentially an opportunity to meet with someone that has been on the call today that you might not otherwise have had an opportunity to connect with. And I loved how you opened this morning, Adam, with that we're built to connect with others in meaningful ways. So this is one opportunity that you can do that and interact with someone else who is living through similar circumstances, has been part of the conversation today, and continue on that conversation. So Riley will be sharing out in the chat the link where you can register for this. So essentially, you just visit the SurveyMonkey link, provide your name and email address by end of day next Monday, and watch your inbox on Tuesday for your pairing. And then we invite you to just reach out to that person and by whatever virtual means you'd like, and have a virtual coffee with them. So the question that we invite you to get started with are, what have been your most helpful self-care practices during the pandemic? And so where you take it from there is up to you. The next opportunity that we have for you in the Working Remotely series is a little bit of a different flavor. So you'll notice that to date, we've been providing a lot of ideas and recommendations and things to test and trial. But next time we're switching it up and providing you an opportunity for some hands-on experience with some of the things that we've been talking about. So this session is primarily intended for people who have some degree of facilitation background or experience, so in an in-person setting, and are looking to translate those practices to a virtual setting. So because of the high degree of interactivity of this session, we are going to cap it at 25 participants. So we encourage you to sign up early. That being said, if we do have a high degree of interest, we're certainly open to hosting another session. So if this sounds like something that you would like to explore a little bit more and have some hands-on experience, then we invite you to join us next Friday. It will be a bit longer of a session, so 90 minutes to be able to play around and test some things. Because we'll be using a few different platforms during this session, we unfortunately will be unable to record it. So this is one that you're going to want to be able to take in live in person. So Riley's sending out the link to the chat in there. And finally, we invite you to contribute your ideas. So especially for those of you who have been part of the series to date, the past 3 sessions, what topics would you like us to see us dive and dig into a little bit more? So we invite you to share your suggestions for future topics on our online Q&A platform, Slido. So Riley's sending out the link in the chat now. So that was a few more wrap-up notes than we normally have. So in summary, here are the takeaways that you can do. So we invite you to sign up for the randomized coffee trial, check out some further detail on our next session and see if that one is for you, and share your ideas for other topics you'd like to see us cover during the rest of the series. And so here, I'll flip it back over to you, Adam, and we'll invite questions within the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Sylvie. Yeah, so any questions that anyone has for me, I'll stick around for a little bit here. And I just have to remember that I have to read these questions out, right?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
So I know that Dee has asked a couple of times if this session is being recorded. Absolutely it is. We will be sending out a note to everyone who was registered for the session and letting them know as soon as the recording is posted to our website. Great, and yeah, the offer too to share with your friends and families who are also finding themselves in this situation. This would be a great one that I think is applicable to healthcare providers, but also to the population at large at this point in time. So we have a question in the chat. How does mindfulness link with radical acceptance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think mindfulness is maybe a form of practicing radical acceptance or related in that way. Like I said, mindfulness really revolves around bringing our attention to our present experience, not trying to change that experience or judge it. And so I guess the opposite of doing those things is really acceptance of that experience in a kind and non-judgmental way, like I said. So I think definitely those things are linked and probably facilitate practice of each other. So more mindfulness, you might be able to find more acceptance, and with more acceptance, probably being more mindful in general as well. Great question.
Great, thanks. Well, it looks like folks are pondering and maybe not sure what the next question is. But Adam, I noticed that you had left your email address. Are you open to people following up?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to email me, then that's totally cool. There's one question here about how to get someone to value. How do you tell someone else to do self-care, or how to value self-care? That's a hard one. That's a difficult thing to do. But I think one of the important things to recognize is that behavior change is difficult, and that's coming from someone who has a doctorate in essentially encouraging people to change their behavior. So it's a difficult thing to do. It's a hard thing to do for ourselves, let alone to help someone else with those things. So I think if at all possible, you can be collaborative with a person. You can encourage a person to maybe set some goals for themselves and have self-care be related to some of those goals. And I go back to like really being reflective about what is important for you or what is important for that other person. And taking good care of ourselves is going to enable us to put more energy, be more effective in accomplishing those things that are important to us. So again, going back to what do you value, what do you need, what's important to you, and that's a really good place to start.
Great, thank you. I see a couple more questions have come in. Any tips to support our kids on this? So I think the whole gamut of keeping mentally healthy and helping them understand what's happening in their little bodies.
Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of good guides that have been published already online about talking to your children about the pandemic. And so if you're struggling with that, or struggling with how to make that conversation age appropriate, I would just encourage you to do some Googling around that. I think kids are not tiny adults is an important thing to remember. However, sometimes they do like the same things as adults, like certainty and control. And so finding ways in your day to make your kids feel like they have a little bit of certainty, that they have some control over what happens in their day, I think those things can be really powerful. And certainty really comes from information and from understanding, right? So if we can find age-appropriate ways to discuss this situation with children, then they're going to be better informed, more understanding in their own way of what's going on and how it's impacting them, and I think better able to deal with the situation because of that. So that's where I would go first, is making sure that they have an appropriate understanding of what's going on, and then you can start to play around with things like control and certainty, and hopefully that will be helpful.
Fantastic. And maybe one last one just to wrap up.
Sure.
So from Caroline, one of the things we're hearing a lot of these days is around timelines of how long we can expect this pandemic to last. Any thoughts or suggestions around how to manage mental expectations around timelines? For example, how to avoid setting ourselves up for disappointment if those timelines are no longer expected or longer than expected?
So this is something I've been thinking about a lot, to be honest. It's a great question. I don't want to go too far off the question, but one of the things that I've been considering is what is the impact of a timeline? And so a lot of governments, you notice across the country, a lot of provincial governments have recently published timelines. And the last time that I looked, as far as I know, Saskatchewan hadn't done that, which I'm actually really happy about. There's this interesting relationship in terms of behavioral economics and how people behave, that if you set up this timeline, then that timeline's invalidated. They're probably less likely to abide by the restrictions that we're currently under. They're probably less likely to trust the message or trust a future timeline. And so what we're seeing in the States, for example, is this constant dynamic change of when this will be over. And it doesn't set up society well to actually respond in the way that it needs to respond. So as much as possible, I would just take it day by day. There is some certainty in the routine there, and I think it's a lovely opportunity to maybe start a fresh routine now, but really control what you can control. Find certainty where you can find it. because unfortunately, in terms of timelines and how the situation is going to play out, we don't have a lot of certainty there. There's not a lot of control there. So I think recognizing that and then finding ways to do that in your own life is really important. Excuse me. One thing that I did just want to mention is that yes, there are absolutely many, many ways that you can take care of yourself, but there are also times when you need help. And so please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out to someone for help, especially healthcare professionals. I mean, suicide rates in our industry are so high, and every single year, scores of Canadian healthcare workers take their own lives because they're afraid to reach out. They're afraid to take on that patient role. So please don't let that be you. I don't want the message today to be all of that responsibility of care resides with you. Some of it does, but there are many times in our lives where we're going to need other people to help us with that. And so it's perfectly okay. It's not weak. It's a point of strength and awareness that you know that you need help. So please, please, please do reach out to someone if you're in that situation. And you might be in that situation today or next week. But if and when you encounter it, reach out to someone and don't stay silent and suffer in silence.
Great reminder, Dr. Stacey, and thanks for that reminder that there's times to go it alone and there's times to lean on others. So with that, we'll just offer a final thanks. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We do encourage you to give us feedback on today's session. So we're always interested in continuing to improve, and we want to make these sessions as valuable as possible. Just a note that at the close of the session, the evaluation survey will automatically pop up. You might see this little prompt that's just telling you that you're being redirected to another site. We do encourage you to click continue to go through and provide us your feedback on today. We'll hope to see you guys again in the near future. And thanks again for joining us. Bye, everyone.